When I learned my late father had left me everything he owned, I thought it was a blessing. But that same night I overheard a whispered plan from my husband and mother-in-law that made my blood run cold. My name is Clara, and just a few weeks ago I thought my life was perfect. I had a loving husband, a cozy home, and a small, peaceful world. My father had been sick for years, and when he finally passed away, I was heartbroken. He was the only family I had left. A week after the funeral, I got a call from Mr. Graham, my father's lawyer. His voice was serious but kind. "Clara, your father left something important for you. Could you come to my office tomorrow morning?" I went, thinking maybe he'd left a letter or a small amount of savings, but what happened next changed everything. Mr. Graham handed me a thick envelope and said, "Your father left all his assets in your name, the house, the farmland, the shares in his company. Everything." I couldn't believe it. My hands trembled as I opened the file. It was all real. My father had trusted me with his entire legacy. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, "Thank you, Dad. I'll make you proud." When I got home, I shared the incredible news with my husband, Daniel. He stared at me with wide eyes, but his expression flickered. For just a split second, his face stiffened before he forced a smile. "Wow, that's amazing, honey," he said, wrapping an arm around me. But his tone felt hollow, like he was just reading a script. His mother, Margaret, who happened to be visiting, suddenly looked a little too happy. "Oh, that's wonderful news, dear," she exclaimed, her voice syrupy sweet. "You're such a lucky girl." Lucky, I thought, but her smile never quite reached her eyes. In the days that followed, Margaret started visiting more often, always uninvited. She'd bring homemade food, do our laundry, and act incredibly caring. It was bizarre because before this she could barely stand me. One morning I found her rummaging through the drawer where I kept my father's old documents. She jumped, then smiled sheepishly. "Oh, I was just helping you organize things, sweetheart." I managed a polite smile, but my gut was screaming that something was deeply wrong. Then Daniel started acting strange. One evening, I saw him pacing the living room, whispering on the phone. The moment I walked in, he hung up. "Just work stuff," he said, letting out a nervous chuckle. He became distant, started locking his phone, hiding bills and avoiding my gaze. I felt a growing unease, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. A few nights later, I woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I neared the hallway, I heard whispers from the dining room. It was Daniel and Margaret. Their voices were low, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "We can't let her have all that control," Margaret hissed. "If she's smart, she'll invest it, and we'll get nothing." "Relax, Mom," Daniel said, his voice a soft poison. "I have a plan. She'll never see it coming." I froze behind the wall, my hands flying to my mouth. My heart hammered against my ribs. They were talking about me, about my inheritance. "We'll start by convincing her to let us handle the money," Margaret continued, her voice full of greed. "You're her husband, she'll trust you." "Yeah," Daniel replied. "And if she refuses, we'll find another way." My world tilted on its axis. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I crept back to bed, my body trembling, and pretended to be asleep when Daniel came in. The man lying next to me was a stranger. I felt sick, betrayed, and utterly alone. The next morning I put on a mask. I made breakfast, smiled, and kissed Daniel goodbye as if nothing had happened. But inside I was a storm of questions. How long had they been planning this? Was our entire marriage a lie? Did they ever really love me? Or just what they thought they could get from me? I knew I couldn't be a victim. I had to protect myself and my father's legacy. My first move was to quietly visit the bank and rent a small locker. I transferred all the important documents, the deed, the company shares, everything, into it. Then, I installed a recording app on my phone, setting it to activate whenever I was in the room. It felt extreme, but my instincts were screaming at me to be prepared. Days turned into a week, and their behavior grew more bizarre. Margaret started asking prying questions about bank accounts, passwords, and even my lawyer's contact information. Daniel, on the other hand, dialed up the affection to an uncomfortable degree. One night he came home with a bouquet of roses. "You know, honey," he said, pulling me into a hug, "I'm so proud of you. Maybe we can make some big investments together now that we have some money." That one word, "we," sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't your money anymore. It was our money. That night, after he fell asleep, I couldn't resist. My hands shaking, I went through his jacket pocket. My fingers closed around a stiff piece of cardstock. It was a business card for a real estate firm, but underneath it was something that made my blood run cold. A half-filled asset transfer form, with my name typed neatly at the top, ready for a signature. He was planning to move my inheritance into his name. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I wanted to scream, to wake him up and confront him right then and there. But I held back. Not yet. I needed irrefutable proof, something they couldn't deny. So I stayed quiet. I started a secret journal documenting everything: dates, times, conversations, his late-night calls. The more I pretended to be the clueless, grieving wife, the more reckless he and his mother became. A few days later, I was in the kitchen when I heard them talking in the backyard, their voices carrying through the open window. "You think she suspects anything?" Margaret asked, her tone laced with anxiety. "No," Daniel replied, his voice dripping with condescending confidence. "She's too naive. She's so wrapped up in her grief she doesn't see a thing. Soon, everything she owns will be ours." I gripped the edge of the counter, tears blurring my vision. My husband, the man I had vowed to spend my life with, was not just a thief, but he thought I was a fool. He was planning to steal my father's last gift to me, the only piece of him I had left. The betrayal was a physical pain, a knife twisting in my chest. I wanted to run out there and expose them, to let all my anger and hurt pour out. But I took a deep breath. I wiped my tears, straightened my shoulders, and forced a calm expression onto my face. I had to be smarter. I had to be stronger. So I continued to smile, to act innocent, and to wait. Because if they were planning a move, I was going to be ready. Their game was almost over, but mine was just beginning. For the next few days, I acted like everything was perfectly fine. I smiled. I cooked Daniel his favorite meals. I even managed to laugh at his jokes. But on the inside, I was crumbling. Daniel was changing, and these weren't small, subtle shifts. He was coming home later and later, whispering on hushed phone calls, and his phone was suddenly locked at all times. It was like a wall had gone up between us. One evening, he was in the shower and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I hesitated for a split second. Then I grabbed it. The message was from Mom, my mother-in-law, Margaret. It read, "Did she sign the papers yet?" My breath caught. Daniel's reply came just a moment later. "Not yet. She's being careful." Then, Margaret's final message. "Then make her trust you. The sooner she signs, the sooner we're free." My stomach twisted into a painful knot. Papers? What papers? My fingers trembled as I scrolled up, my eyes scanning their previous conversations. The messages I found made my hands go ice cold. Daniel had written, "Once it's transferred, she'll have no control." And Margaret's reply, "Perfect. Keep her calm until then." I quickly locked the phone and placed it back on the nightstand, my mind reeling. I just sat there in the silence trying to process what I just read. My husband, the man I loved, and his mother were actively plotting to take everything from me. My inheritance from my father, my home, my entire future. When he came out of the shower, I forced a smile, acting as if nothing was wrong. "You must be tired," I said, my voice sounding sweeter than I felt. "Yeah," he replied, planting a kiss on my forehead. It was a long day. But as he drifted off to sleep beside me, I stared at his face in the dim light and whispered to myself, "You're not the man I married." The very next morning, He approached me with a huge, fake smile and a file in his hand. "Clara," he started, his tone oozing with concern. "I was thinking, since you inherited everything from your dad, maybe we should invest it smartly. You know, for our future." He handed me the file. The cover page read, "Property Investment Proposal." "It's just a few forms to sign," he said casually, trying to seem nonchalant. "I've already talked to the agent." Every instinct in my body was screaming at me, but I had to play along. I had to see this through. "Oh wow, Daniel, that's great. Can I read it over first?" A flicker of panic crossed his eyes before he masked it with a forced laugh. "Of course," he said. As soon as he left for work, I ripped open that file. Page after page, everything looked official, legitimate. That is, until I got to the very last page. Hidden in the tiniest, almost unreadable fine print was a single clause. By signing this document, the undersigned transfers full ownership rights of all existing properties and assets to the joint partner, Daniel White. I felt dizzy, like the room was spinning. He wasn't investing our money. He was trying to steal everything I had. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone, but I managed to dial the number for Mr. Graham, my father's lawyer. "Mr. Graham," I choked out. "Please, I need you to check something." I rushed to his office and laid the file on his desk. He read through it silently, his expression growing more and more grim. When he finished, he looked up at me, his face pale. "Clara, if you had signed this, you would have legally handed over every single asset to your husband. This isn't just manipulation, this is fraud." Tears burned my eyes. "What do I do now?" He looked at me with a serious, steady gaze. "You stay quiet. Do not confront them yet. We need to gather proof. If they think for 1 second that you know what they're up to, they'll change their plan." I nodded, wiping away my tears. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in a war I was terrified I had to win alone. That night, I went to a store and bought a small voice recorder. I hid it behind a row of books on the living room shelf. I told myself I would capture their conversations, whatever they were planning next. And I didn't have to wait very long. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of hushed voices drifting up from downstairs. It was Daniel and Margaret. I crept to the top of the stairs, my heart pounding. Margaret whispered, "She's too calm." "Are you sure she doesn't know?" Daniel scoffed. "No, she's clueless. She's too emotional to suspect anything." Margaret pressed on. "Then hurry it up. What if she changes the will?" "Relax, Mom," Daniel said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Once she signs, I'll transfer everything. She'll be left with absolutely nothing." My blood boiled. Every word was a knife twisting in my gut. But then, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Margaret asked, "And what if she refuses to sign?" There was a long, chilling pause before Daniel finally answered. "Then we'll handle it another way." The silence that followed was suffocating. My breathing grew shallow. What did that mean? Handle it another way? The next morning, after they had left, I quietly retrieved the recorder. I listened to every single second, every cruel, calculated word. I had the proof of their fraud, but I still needed to understand their true intentions. Days passed. I continued the charade, avoiding eye contact, pretending to be happy, and just waiting. Then one evening, Daniel proposed something that made my heart stop cold. "Hey, honey, we've both been so stressed lately. How about a weekend trip? Just the two of us. No phones, no distractions." The way he said it was too soft, too rehearsed. In the background, I saw Margaret smile. "That's a lovely idea, Daniel. You two need some alone time." Her voice was dripping with fake sweetness. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile. "Sure, that sounds perfect." That night, I called Mr. Graham again and told him everything, including the trip. He was silent for a few moments, and then he said, his voice firm and serious, "Clara, listen to me very carefully. Do not go alone, and whatever happens, keep recording." I started preparing, but not for a romantic getaway. I was preparing for survival. I backed up all the voice recordings, made copies of the fraudulent documents, and saved a copy of my real will into a hidden folder on a cloud drive. Then, I sent a complete set of everything to my lawyer. When Daniel came home that evening, he looked disturbingly calm. He wrapped his arms around me in a hug and said, "I booked the cabin for this weekend. You're going to love it. It's right near the cliffs by the lake." The cliffs. My heart skipped a beat. Something in his eyes, in his practiced calmness, told me this wasn't a vacation. It was a setup. The night before the trip, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside made me jump. Daniel had fallen asleep right beside me, his breathing even and calm, as if he didn't have a monster hiding behind that peaceful face. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I knew I had to do something. When I finally gathered the courage, my feet silent on the cold floor, I opened his laptop. My fingers trembled as I typed in the address he had mentioned for our little getaway. The screen loaded, and my blood ran cold. Old Lakeview Cabin, property closed since 2019 due to accident risk. The place was abandoned. It hit me like a ton of bricks. He wasn't taking me on a trip. He was taking me somewhere no one would ever find me. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold my phone. I immediately called Mr. Graham, my father's lawyer. He was the only person I could trust. I explained everything, my voice a frantic whisper. He told me to stay calm and that he would keep the police informed. "Clara," he said, his voice firm but reassuring, "I need you to go with him. But you have to turn on a voice recorder. Don't let him know you suspect anything. We will track you." My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. Going with him felt like walking into a trap, but what choice did I have? I nodded silently into the phone and whispered, "Okay, I'll finish this, one way or another." The next morning, Daniel was unusually cheerful. It was terrifying. "Ready for our trip, sweetheart?" he asked, planting a kiss on my forehead. The gesture that once felt loving now felt like a final goodbye. "Yes," I said softly, forcing a smile to hide the sheer terror churning in my gut. We drove for hours. The city faded away, replaced by endless roads that grew narrower and narrower. The trees became denser, casting long, dark shadows across the car, and the silence inside grew heavier with every mile. At one point, he turned to me with a smile and said, "No signal out here. Isn't it peaceful?" Peaceful? I wanted to scream. My palms were sweating. I discreetly reached into my pocket, my fingers fumbling with my phone until I felt the familiar vibration. The recorder was on. I slipped it back into my jacket, praying he hadn't noticed. After what felt like an eternity, nearly 3 hours later, he pulled over. There it was. A lonely, half-broken cabin perched precariously by a cliff. Below, the lake shimmered, cold and unforgivingly quiet. He stepped out of the car and opened my door, grinning from ear to ear. "Come on, let's take a walk by the edge. The view is amazing." Something in his eyes, a glint I'd never seen before, made my stomach twist into a knot. As we walked toward the cliff's edge, I saw his hand move inside his coat pocket. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard I was sure he could hear it. Then, I saw it. A flash of cold, hard metal. A wrench. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice barely audible as I took a small step back. "What are you doing?" He sighed and the cheerful mask dropped, replaced by a sad, chilling smile. "You weren't supposed to know, Clara, but you've always been too clever for your own good. You've made this too complicated." He moved closer, his shadow falling over me. "After this, everything will go back to normal. I'll tell them it was a terrible accident. A tragic fall." Tears streamed down my face, hot and fast. "You loved me once, didn't you?" I pleaded, my voice breaking. "I did," he said, his voice as cold as the lake below. "Until you got greedy." I took another step back, closer to the edge, and pretended to trip. It was now or never. "Wait," I said, holding up my phone as if I wanted to record a final message. "At least tell me why. Before you do this." He actually laughed, a soft, cruel sound that echoed in the silence. Because I deserve it, Clara. All of it. You wouldn't even have that inheritance if it weren't for me. Just as he raised his hand, a voice boomed from behind us, loud, authoritative, and commanding. Drop the weapon, hands up. Daniel froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. Sirens suddenly blared, erupting from the quiet woods. Police cars, hidden behind the trees, burst into view. He dropped the wrench with a clatter, his face a picture of pure shock. What? How did... I pulled the tiny recording device from my pocket, my hand steady for the first time all day. You forgot, Daniel, I said, my voice clear and strong. I record everything now. The police cuffed him as he stammered in disbelief. But Mom told me it would work. She said it was foolproof. Margaret, his mother, was arrested that very same evening at her house. When the officers arrived, she was frantically trying to hide documents and bundles of cash. All of it linked to the fake contracts she'd created to steal my father's company. Days later, I sat in court staring at Daniel across the room. He looked pale, lost. A complete stranger, not the man I had once loved and trusted. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. The judge's voice filled the silent room as he read the sentence. Daniel White and Margaret White, found guilty of attempted fraud and attempted murder. I closed my eyes and took a deep, shaky breath. It was finally over. After the verdict, Mr. Graham came up to me, his expression kind. Your father would be so proud of you, Clara. You protected what he built, and more importantly, you protected yourself. Tears filled my eyes as I whispered back, I didn't just protect his inheritance, I protected my life. A week later, I returned to my father's old house, the place where this whole nightmare began. The sunset glowed through the windows, casting a warm, peaceful light across the room. I walked over to his photo frame and managed a faint smile. You were right, Dad, I whispered to the empty room. Money really does show you who truly cares. But I survived, and I'll never ever let anyone use me again. I placed the inheritance papers safely in the drawer, turned off the lights, and for the first time in a very long time, I slept without fear. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who stand closest to the edge, ready to push us off. But if you can just stay strong, you'll see who falls first. Thank you so much for watching. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. See you next time.